Welcome to Beyond Inventory Optimization, a webcast series that focuses on hot topics around supply chain excellence and inventory optimization. You will be able to view these webcasts anytime online. I'll give you the URL at the end of the show. So let's get started. Today's episode is all about the upswing. We're not sure exactly how strong or fast it'll be ultimately, but we're anticipating it. Just as smart companies got out in front of the economic downturn, now we're looking at an upswing in demand, in revenue goals, in customer service targets, and an upswing in the inventory needed to support all this. And our guest today has spent a lot of time recently at major corporations defining the role of inventory optimization in today's more growth-oriented environment. Dr. Sean Willems holds an operations research degree, a PhD from MIT Sloan School, and a master's in operations research from MIT. His groundbreaking research resulted in the development of inventory optimization tools that have freed up millions in working capital for the companies around the world. I contacted Sean to ask what role inventory optimization will play as senior executives transition from an inventory cutting mentality to a grow faster than your competition mentality. And before we start, I should say that this conversation was so productive that we've decided to break it up into two parts. So check out our website for part two.
So Sean, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Chris.
We're living in exciting times, and I think that might be a curse. May you live in exciting times. The exciting times here is we just went through this business down cycle, and I don't know if you noticed this as well, is that people were just cutting their inventories and downsizing and cutting all sorts of expenses during that down cycle. So we got a lot of interest in inventory optimization because people wanted to know how to get inventory out because they wanted that capital in their war chest to be able to do other things with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you sort of think of, the problems they're facing, they're looking at, which assets can they reduce. And unfortunately, you're sitting at, inventory, which is slow moving given the demand, so you might have to fire sale some of it, make some painful choices there about liquidating things, and then, of course, painful choices about people. So in that time, both of those levers were pulled.
Yep, and I was reading the recently released article on working capital by CFO magazine, and they talked about how companies were able to throw stuff out of the boat, so to speak, to maintain their profitability on the way down with the market, with the cycle. And now, though, we seem to be bumping along the bottom, and everybody's cautiously optimistic about going up the other way. And the question is, what do we do now so we don't have service outages, and is there an opportunity here that we can tell people about?
Yeah, I think there really is, and it really is an interesting time in this regard because we now have a situation where, for the past couple of years, literally, people have cut these inventories. And now conditions start to look like they're getting better. But as one of the executives in this company, you have to ask yourself, the world didn't end actually when I cut inventories. So why should I increase them significantly? And I think now we see that supply chain managers and executives are being put under a lot more scrutiny to justify why they want to increase inventory.
Right, because a lot of this reduction was not scientifically based. It was brute force. I want to know how you're going to reduce 10% of your inventory across the board.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And at that point, they started to see, say, 2 years ago that what was 2 months of supply suddenly looked like 4 months of supply, suddenly looked like 8 months of supply. A set of these companies got ahead of the curve and then said, okay, we've got to really turn off manufacturing capacity so we drain this inventory out. And now they're in a world of, okay, what's the right way to actually increase this inventory again, possibly?
Right. So what you're saying, though, is the executive who they've been fighting over the microeconomics of service level versus inventory, they said, hey, wait, I just cut inventory by 20% and nothing bad happened. So why should I trust you guys now?
That really is, I think, the major challenge that supply chain managers are going to face as they start to increase this inventory, trying to get people to justify the increases they want to make. How we see companies dealing with the need to increase service is to carefully evaluate what drives their inventory requirements. So these are just the straight issues of what forecast do they see coming, and then how much of that do they want to satisfy? How much risk do they want to take on with this inventory? So I see a much more holistic view of inventory as working capital. What's the business case for having this additional inventory?
Some of the things I'm hearing, your typical line business unit manager I'm talking to, this year in his budget, they'll say, we want service levels to be 99%, we want you to increase your turns by 50%, and we want you to decrease obsolescence by 50%.
Do all that also while we increase the number of SKUs by 20% or something. I would say you tell that guy that you need tools to manage that process, that you can't do it just by rule of thumb. And the real challenge is to figuring out opportunistically what things don't hurt you to cut and what things do you need to increase. And, it sounds simple, which is actually reassuring because, that's what you really do need to do. The biggest opportunity, I think, will be for companies to look across those SKUs and say, okay, what is the right policy on a SKU-by-SKU basis? Given those kind of aggressive targets, particularly being built on this base of low inventory currently in the field, one needs to base it on SKU-by-SKU analysis, which can be automated so the labor input is not enormous, but one needs to use a tool to solve that.
Right, you're exactly right. Getting the mix right, and also what their eyes really light up when you start to categorize it. When you start to say, here's this type of SKU, here's this business's SKUs, so they can see the impact, because not everything's created equally, right?
While at the low level, I'd say like at the analyst planner level, we know we're doing this SKU by SKU. Once we get to the manager level and once that manager starts to sell this to the executive team, you need to be able to aggregate it up. What you got to be able to tell them is for this set of SKUs, like for this kind of product family, we have this policy. And it is based on the conditions of that family. If we do that, then we're really on the track of getting buy-in from the team because people are like, oh, okay, I understand. Product family A is the higher margin product family than product family B. Of course I should have more of those units. There's science underneath that the manager and analyst are running to, but that part is sort of in the noise for what needs to be communicated above.
Yep, I liken it to the market segmentation that people do in marketing, but it's operational, product, customer, and that sort of categorization operationally.
The other sort of nice opportunity, I'd say, for a forward-looking manager coming off of this low base is you can be creative about how you want to think about increasing inventory. I think we all know, given that demand is currently increasing and hopefully it will stay on this increasing trajectory, that more inventory in the supply chain will be required. That's a given. But the question is, how should it best be deployed? And there certainly is an opportunity with things at this lower base to do, I'd say, two things that we know are useful, but sometimes when the system is all humming along, you don't want to put in place the effort to change. So one of them would be postponement, to delay differentiation, to keep things in its raw state as long as possible. In this new environment, that's certainly holding things at a cheaper point is going to be valuable. The other is, and one I've been more involved with lately, is starting to actually optimize the inventory at customer locations. So as we all know, several of the customers for the kind of companies we work with aren't always really scientific in how they set their targets. They might in the store. They might say in a store, I want this many facings, and a facing is this deep. But in their own DCs, they might have very ad hoc rules. So we've seen advanced companies now start to say, hey, instead of increasing the inventory at my DC, why don't I start to manage the inventory at my customer's DC? Not their stores. They still have store control. But at their DC, the idea there being that we can increase our inventory, but it's now closer to the customer. It's more responsive.
Well, there's a couple of interesting nuggets there. When the CFO comes back to you and says, hey, I decreased inventory and nothing happened. Why should I give you more capital budget now to buy more inventory? Instead of seeing that as a challenge, you can see that as an opportunity to say, here's how. We're going to proactively take over the inventory in our channel to get a more responsive look at demand and to pool risk across the channels, right?
Exactly. And this point you've hit on about getting a clearer sense of the demand signal is such a benefit of this work, right? So you're absolutely right. The overall inventory requirement to the company likely won't change versus having it at a distribution center because now we're properly allocating it downstream. But the good news is we now have a much clearer sense of what the demand signal is downstream. And we can use that to smooth out our variability and hold less upstream.
So across the overall supply chain, by doing this, there may be a small bump in inventory, but there's an overall lowering of inventory in the total supply chain, you're probably getting more shelf space and being a better partner, too.
There also, I think, is a very real first-mover advantage here. We all know that, there's different takes on how to be a trusted partner and a valued partner, and for the kind of companies we're all talking about, they're all large enough that what we're really doing here is shifting the playing field. We're adding value-added service to our customer, which is to manage this inventory. We all know we're not doing that to be philanthropists. We're doing that to lock in them tighter to us, that if we're the first one to do it, then hopefully that gives us an advantage against our competitors.
And we noticed some of that 2 years ago now when we entered this current down cycle, that the people who had their inventory management tendrils out into the channels were able to shut down capacity and shut down inventory faster and avoided stuffing the channels and avoided that 90-day overshoot that you typically get before they realize something's going wrong.
They could sense it coming sooner than the others, which is perfect.
And with that, I'm going to end part 1 of Episode 6, my forward-looking conversation with Dr. Sean Willems. He has a lot more to offer in Part 2, which you can find on Logility's website. Just go to www.logility.com and click on Library in the main navigation bar. And we hope you'll also download some of our white papers on various supply chain topics and see how inventory optimization can free up working capital, reduce inventory, handle uncertain demand with confidence, and raise your customer service levels while actually cutting supply chain costs. So that's it for Part 1 of Episode 6, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and please watch Part 2. This is Beyond Inventory Optimization.